After establishing a plan of action to implement a fix to a problem, the next thing to do is to make sure that we verify system functionality over time. The first thing we need to do is talk to the users affected by the problem, if in fact users were directly affected, to ensure that they're happy with the solution. They need to be convinced that there's no longer a problem. Then we want to make sure that we put measures into place to ensure that the problem is not repeated. Now, if the problem, for example, was a malware infection due to a USB thumb drive being plugged in, we might put in preventative measures to scan USB thumb drives prior to anything being allowed to be copied from it. Or we might block certain types of USB devices, for example, through Microsoft Active Directory group policy. So there are things that we can do to make sure the problem doesn't occur, even though we've got a fix to the solution. Then we need to make sure that we track our implemented solution over time. Now, how can we do that, especially on a large scale? Well, instead of going to logs on an individual device, such as a router or a laptop or a user's smartphone, we can also configure log forwarding to a central host. Now, this is important if we want to be able to monitor aspects of our environment from a central location, a single management pane. There are also monitoring solutions available in software form where we install agents on devices to track them remotely. Now, we have to make sure that the problem is solved and that the affected stakeholders are satisfied with our solution. But sometimes we can't be sure of that unless we consult a subject matter expert. A SME, or subject matter expert, might be required, for instance, if we've got a custom-built sales program that's used by sales staff in our organization. If we don't work in sales and we don't have experience with that solution, how can we be sure to test it perfectly to make sure that indeed the problem is solved? So sometimes the SME is the user that's affected by the problem in the first place. So reach out to them if it makes sense to. We then have to consider whether or not our solution has introduced new problems. The tricky thing about that is sometimes that's not apparent until later on down the road, and that feeds into the fact that we need to monitor the solution over time. Putting preventative measures into effect, for example, might mean applying updates on a scheduled basis. If the problem with a situation was that updates weren't applied, then maybe we need to make sure they are applied, and scheduling would be one way to put that into effect. In our example, once we've got a solution found for our user that was previously unable to save new customer profiles, there are a few things that we need to consider. One of which is not only to monitor our implemented solution over time, but also to make sure that the affected stakeholders know that they can communicate back to us should they start seeing symptoms of that same problem again. And of course, the affected stakeholders should also know that we are monitoring the solution over time to ensure we don't have a repeat incident.